Welcome, guys, to another episode. I'm excited tonight because we have a very, very special guest. We've got Dr. Andy Toy. He's pretty much done everything in dentistry. He is a mentor to mentors. He's a mentor for dentists. He teaches on many courses. He's practice owner. Even with some of the dentistry that he does, he is leading as a platinum Invisalign specialist and CEO of the Dental Business Academy as well. So many different things that Dr. Andy Toy has gotten involved with. I believe he was also a foundation trainer.
Yep.
So many things that he's gotten involved with within dentistry. So we're going to be excited to really get some pearls of wisdom from Dr. Andy Toy. Dr. Andy Toy, thank you for coming on tonight.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Arnold. It really is. And I've had so much support throughout my career. I think it's just a pleasure to be able to give something back if I can help anybody out there. And of course, the more we help each other, the more we all flourish.
Yes.
And so, that really has been the story of my career. Yeah. And, I feel only an obligation to continue that and carry that on. And your positive approach and desire to help people, Arnold, is fantastic. It's a sign of a true professional, frankly. So there you go. And that's a lovely introduction. It tells you two things, actually. Firstly, if I've done all those things, I've been around a long time. Okay, and so literally my 41st year starting this January in practice.
Yes.
And the second thing it tells you is I've made loads and loads and loads of mistakes. Okay, so it's interesting, actually. When you give me an address a bit like that, it tells you all the things that I've done. It doesn't tell you the things that I did wrong and the things that didn't go right. And there's loads of those. Let's face it, there's loads of those.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my worst mistakes generally were when I was younger, which meant I had a chance to work them out, particularly on the financial side. So there you go.
And hopefully we can learn a lot from those mistakes
right.
you made on our behalf.
Right, there you go. Or if you do make the same mistake, you've got a sense of, well, actually, there's a way out of this. The world won't fall down. So, and in a way, we all learn. We all make mistakes, and the idea is to learn from them, not just to, bury your head in the sand and ignore it or think it's the end of the world or whatever. So, so there you go. And I suppose my main driver for wanting to help younger members of the profession was really the only reason I'm in dentistry was that very first job that I got with Bob Borrell up in Grimsby and his desire to invest in a young dentist, because I left, I staggered through dental school, partly because of alcohol, but also because I got fed up with exams and fed up with the whole thing around dentistry. So, I scraped through my finals. I had a final viva with the external examiner, right?
Yeah.
And if you're having a final viva with an external examiner, you're either like an honors graduate or you're borderline, because I know how education works now.
Yeah.
And I was not an honors graduate. I was borderline. And I was so lucky because it was the last year of Professor Arthur Darling, who basically brought up Bristol Dental School from its bootstraps in 1956. Yeah. He was retiring in 1980, and it was his last year. And he clearly was determined to get every one of his students through, because the external examiner, Professor Davenport, could not get a word in edgeways.
Yeah.
Arthur Darling wouldn't let me get a word in edgeways, even if I had a word to get in, which I didn't. And, he basically dominated 19 of those 20 minutes.
Yes.
And somehow I passed. So I pass, hating dentistry, but with this overdraft, which in 1980 was unusual because we all had grants and fees paid and stuff like that. But, I'd had to work my way through dental school. And anyway, I hated dentistry.
Was dentistry your idea, getting into dental school, or was it your parents?
Oh, yeah.
What made you even?
Oh, that's interesting, actually, because if you went to a school like I did, you were either a doctor, dentist, engineer, or a teacher. My brother actually was the only architect in about 10 years. So you can see how we were skewed toward the sciences. And you see a little bit of that coming back now. Everybody has to do all the sciences and all that creative stuff. But anyway, but what I really liked about being a dentist, I thought, was the teamwork. That's what really excited me when I was thinking about pharmacy, medicine, stuff like that. And I went to Cardiff Dental School and saw all these team members. But in Bristol in those days, the dental school hammered all that out of you. Okay. I wasn't academic, so I wasn't going to go back into academia. I certainly wasn't going to go and do another degree to become a consultant or max fax. Yes. And there was the kids, school service, which I loved seeing patients and kids, but that was pretty limiting. Yeah. So it left with general practice. And as far as the dental school was concerned, the general practitioners were a bunch of shysters, frankly. Okay. They were bottom of the barrel. All they did was made loads of money and send their problems and shit dentistry into the dental school to get it sorted out by the experts. Yeah. So why would I want to go into general practice? But it was actually my only option. And I had this overdraft, so I had to pay it off. So I answered this advert. It said, come to Louth in Lincolnshire, and I will teach you general practice. Yes. And I went and visited this guy, Bob Borrell, had this newly built practice in a market town in Lincolnshire. And he was doing something called health cultivation. Okay. So I said, what's health cultivation? He says, well, I realized that you can grow health in your community. Because kids, their teeth come through healthy, and all you've got to do is keep it that way. So instead of fighting all this disease, why don't you just help the families cultivate the health in the kid's mouth? Yeah. And he'd been doing this for 10 years, and he was working with his extended duties nurses and stuff like that. And remember, this is the 70s when 80% of people had a lot of disease, right? And he was transforming it in practice. And this massive light goes on in my head, says, this is why I'm in dentistry. Yeah. Nobody said I could make a difference to my community. It was, as far as dental school was concerned, it was drill, fill, and bill. Blood, sweat, and pus. And that didn't turn me on. I was not turned on by money. Yeah. And there was Bob Borrell doing something significant. So, fortunately, I was the only person who applied for the job. So he had to take me on. And basically, I started off in his branch practice in Grimsby. Yes. With his trained team of dental nurses, and I started doing health cultivation, or what we'd call prevention, right from day one. That's really, I really saw a purpose and something I could be, useful in, and that's what set me off. And if Bob hadn't been that bothered, he could have just taken me on as an associate, stuck me in there, and just keep drill, fill, and bill, and it'll pay the bills. And he didn't want to do that. So I'm forever grateful there. So after that, I couldn't wait to be a dentist. And then my whole professional development thing really took off, basically. So
there's this presentation that you do, which is called the Toy Story. And through that, you pretty much go through your dental journey from graduating to where you are now. Talk to us about getting into practice ownership and starting your own squad. Was that a normal thing around the 80s?
Yeah, it wasn't unusual, actually, Arnold, because there were not that many practices. You could just, if you put your plate up, you could just start treating NHS patients. Okay. They were desperate to have dentists, and there was lots of new parts of a town, for instance, where they built loads of homes, but there was no local services because all the dentists were the traditional in the middle of the city or in the middle of the town sort of thing. And it may have been partly my friendship group were a little bit like that. You meet up at the weekends, and you have a few jars, and then what you get talking about, well, if I owned my practice, it'd be like this. And remember, my brother was an architect. Yes. So he'd be involved in that. So he was always sketching out ideas and things like that. And he was out of work at the time. So, it became obvious he could do the research and stuff. So Bob Borrell had his own son qualifying. So I knew I was leaving. And I went to look for a few associate roles. And, I remember going to one, and they had I saw 30 sets of full dentures lined up on the bench. Right. Every week they did 30 sets of full dentures and full clearances under gas. And others were mostly drill, fill, and bill. And nobody was doing health cultivation. Yeah. So I thought, well, this is why I'm in dentistry. I've got to have my own practice. And it so happened that my brother did loads of research, and it became obvious that not only did I have to do a cold squat, but I actually chose an area where there was a greenfield site and we had to build our own place from scratch.
Yeah.
And
where was the location? What town? Or
it was Loughborough in Leicestershire. Now, the reason I chose the Midlands is I really love curry. So one of the things that had happened when I moved up north, my mate was in Bradford, and we used to go to Bradford every weekend for the curry. Yeah. I got totally into curry. And, you can live and work anywhere, can't you? So you ought to choose somewhere that you think is going to be, a nice place to live, or near to a nice place to live, if you like.
Yeah.
And so the curry in Leicester is just unbelievable. So, so that's really why I ended up in Loughborough. But it was a fantastic opportunity. Of course, I had to build from scratch, and which was like 9 months of financing the whole building, buying the land, stuff like that. I still had this overdraft, by the way. I hadn't quite managed to get rid of my overdraft from dental school. I've been spending loads of money on courses. I went to the States in 1982 to the Pank Institute. I went there again in 83. And so I was investing in myself. I love my cars. And I managed to scrape together actually 110% funding to build this thing from scratch.
110%.
On day one, you got all the overheads and no patients, no income. And, I turned it, we got it going. And by 85, I started at 84, 85, I was full time. 87, I became a foundation trainer, as you know it today. So all that input that I'd had from Bob Borrell, I started to be able to give to the younger dentists. Foundation training was just coming in.
Was it popular doing foundation training at that point, or was it a few students who were?
It was very few. Yeah, I mean, they literally had up to that point, I think probably 3 pilot sites, maybe 36 throughout the whole UK.
Yeah.
And then they opened it up to more areas. So it was the start of it in my area, and it was still voluntary. And I got going. I had a team of probably 10 nurses and receptionists. I had treatment coordinators and stuff like that. I was working.
That's ahead of the time. Treatment coordinator.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, my favorite course that I run in my academy is for treatment level 3 qualification for treatment coordination. So, we're launching a new one for Invisalign right now. So yeah, I mean, really into teamwork, and the benefits to the patients is just unbelievable. Yeah. And we won awards for our oral health prevention on the NHS. I was bringing health to Loughborough, basically. Yeah. Fantastic, great team, and really got out of their comfort zone. To do, not just be a nurse sitting in the corner, but to be totally involved and taking impressions, X-rays, and all those things.
How many years would you say it was from you qualifying to owning your practice? Was it 4 or 5 years?
It was in the 4th year that I started it.
4th year. So
now, when you say own, that doesn't mean say. I mean, the bank owned it. But I borrowed a lot. You can borrow a lot of money as a dentist, which is great, but also a challenge, also a problem as well, of course.
How did you know that you were ready? Where did the confidence come from that you could now
arrogance.
A team of people to run a practice? Because if you fast forward to today, for someone to own a practice or to be running a practice at that many years outside of graduating, it's a huge thing. And it probably was a huge thing back then as well. How did you get to a point where you were ready?
Well, life was simpler. We didn't have all the regs and stuff like that we have today. So that, that was easier. And people really weren't looking over your shoulder all the time. So you didn't really have that worry. Okay. And I'd been taught well by Bob Borrell. I'd basically seen a lot of things. He was great for systems and things like that, which really appealed to me. So I had a certain element of that as well. And there's a lot of trial, by trial and error, and you keep working along. And I worked really, really hard, So for instance, in the first year, I was working part-time in Grimsby and part-time in Loughborough, which at the time was like a 4-hour drive.
Wow.
So I'd work Thursday, Friday, Saturday Saturday morning in Loughborough, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Grimsby. So that helped. But frankly, my overdraft just kept going up. So the one thing I didn't have was really good business skills. I had a sense of how to develop and manage a team and all that sort of stuff in the clinical side, but my business skills were dreadful.
So did
And
you get somebody to come in to help you with the business side, or did you have to just learn as you were going along?
And I didn't. No, I didn't. And I actually came to a crisis, actually, Arnold. So everybody's aware, I'm sure everybody listening to this will be aware of what a financial crisis is like, because we had one back in 2008, right?
Yeah.
So even if you're a budding dental student now, you want to be a dental student, you're 17, 18, you're probably aware, or that you knew there was a financial crisis 10, 11, 12 years ago. And, when there's a financial crisis, basically the banks are really worried about any sort of debt that they've got. So they're piling, clawing back at all their dodgy loans. And I had something like a 45 grand overdraft at that point. Now, I think I did the sums the other day. I think that's the equivalent today of something like £200,000 or something like that, right? That's overdraft. Never mind all my other stuff. Now, what happened in the last financial crisis was they dropped the interest rates to pretty much zero, and they're still zero still to this day. What happened in that financial crisis is they put the interest rates up to 16.5%, and I was borrowing money at 21%. Well, I ran out of money. Basically, it was, you had to get £21 for every £100 you borrowed every year. It was just impossible. And I effectively became bankrupt. I wasn't officially made bankrupt though. But basically the bank said, we're shutting your account. You've got to pay us all back. I stopped paying my mortgages. I stopped paying the lab bills. I kept paying the staff. And the low point was me walking around the banks of Loughborough in the week before Christmas, borrowing cash on my 3 credit cards.
Wow. Getting
cash out. That's 30-odd%, but it was the only way I could pay my wonderful team their Christmas wages. Wow. And for some of those team members, that was the only money they were going to get, right? Because they were the main wage earner for their family, single parent or something like that. And I was that close, and I managed to pay their Christmas wages. And I mean, you talk about all these wonderful things we do in dentistry. You've just given, me this great introduction. I mean, how shit is that? You can't even pay your staff the Christmas wages. How good am I?
So is this because there's not enough money coming into the practice, or that costs are just too high?
Right.
Where was the discrepancy?
Good. That's a really good question, because I was focused on gross, and I could gross a lot. Right? I worked really hard. We had all this team working for me. Our gross was fantastic. What I didn't have control of was the costs. And I had this huge financial cost, plus all the team I was running and stuff like that. And the financial costs were just too great. And the problem was I'd gone in with no money of my own. Okay. And if you say, yeah, it's much more difficult now, it is more difficult, because I can't believe anybody would go in if they haven't got some family money or something behind them, which I didn't have any, but it's even more so now, right? Anyway, I'm walking around the banks of Loughborough. I've managed to get over Christmas, and I'm going to the bank managers in all the other banks in Loughborough. And the good thing about the good old days was you didn't have a computer that said no. You had a proper person. His name's John Whitehead. I'll never forget him. And I showed him all my figures and all that sort of stuff. He could see I was a hard worker. Yeah. He knew of the practice because we'd won awards and stuff like that. And he looked me in the eye. He said, Andrew, I'll back you and refinance your loans and give you cheaper loans over a longer period if you promise me one thing. He said, if you promise me to focus and put as much attention on your business skills as you clearly have on your clinical skills, because you cannot run an ethical healthcare practice unless you make a profit.
Okay, you have to explain that one.
Well, okay, so if you are ethical, there'll be times when you've got to give the patient the money back. Or there'll be times when, it takes a bit longer because they've been difficult, or something's not quite gone right because you've done something wrong or your team member's done something wrong. You need enough profit in order to have enough leeway to do that. You also need to make profit because you've got to build up this sort of reserves that you need. And that was part of the problem, Arnold, because I was not bothered about money. I'm not motivated by money. And money, in a sense, was a dirty word to me. And remember, in those days of the NHS, when I qualified on the NHS, the maximum you would charge anybody was something like £1.97, the max.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't want to talk about money. I was worried about talking about money. And yet you cannot ignore the money. And yet I'd known people who were totally into the money and were shit dentists, frankly, excuse my French, and unethical. And, I wasn't one of them. So I couldn't think about the money, but you have to think about the money. It's a resource. And you need to be able to charge enough and have control of your costs. And also, mainly for me, control of my financial costs. Now, it's a great time. I don't know where you're at in your career, actually, Arnold, because I don't know enough about you. But if you want to invest in a practice, now is a great time because money is so cheap. And so this is a good time, especially if you're young, because look, I was pretty much bankrupt by the age of 30, 32, right? But I worked my way out of it. You're young enough, you can, if you're a hard worker, you can work your way out of it. And the reason they didn't make me bankrupt is because I'm a dentist. They know where I am, that I'm registered. I've got all this sort of ethical responsibilities anyway, which I take on. And they also knew I was a hard worker. And, dentists can gross, basically, if they apply themselves. So anyway, I'm at this crossroads now, because I can't carry on like I was before. I've got to make a profit. And lots of my friends were making plenty of money on the NHS, thanks very much. They were doing drill, fill and bill, blood, sweat and pus. And so I'm thinking, well, do I have to do that? Or is there another way? And I looked for another way, because part of the benefit for me, I don't know if you know anything about the Pankey Institute, but I went to learn about occlusion and restorative and stuff like that. But actually, there's a lot they talk about is what you value. And they talk about having a life in dentistry, not just making a living out of dentistry. And, at the age of 22, 23, that really chimed with me. And so when I was at that crossroads, which way do I go? All that work that I'd done on myself came back to me. And I said, well, I'm not going to go down drill, fill and bill. That is not why I'm in dentistry. I've got to find another way. So in my network of dentists, friends of mine, there was a few of us who were trying to do all this oral health prevention NHS on the NHS. And this thing called total quality management was just coming into healthcare. It had been around in industry for decades.
Total quality management.
Total quality management, right? And so we clubbed together and we employed one consultant between us to really get control of the quality of what we were doing in practice. It's all about systems, processes, and stuff like that. And try and get control of the quality. And when you get control of the quality, your quality goes up and your costs go down. And when your costs go down, you start to make a profit. And basically, I literally had no money out of the practice for 2 years. The nurses were taking out more money than I was. But I just landed myself the job of program director for the local foundation training. It was called vocational training in those days. So I was being paid 4 sessions a week, I think, to run this vocational training scheme. And that was my only income. I had to sell my lovely cars. And, I got myself an old banger. But you know what, as they say, I was happy because I was working on this practice and really trying to turn it around, you see, which we did. So the consultant cost me 18,500. And by the second year of that whole process, I made a profit of 50 grand, which in today's money is probably about 200 grand, something like that.
So how long was it from you starting the squat to things turning around and you actually making?
Right. So that would be 8 years.
8 years. Wow.
Yeah. And through that time, just about that time, do you know that all the dentists are always fed up with the NHS contract? Right? Have you heard that? And the last contract was much better.
Was it the same back then?
Oh, it's always been like that. And I think it was 1992, and we were about to change. We had the opportunity to change from a drill, fill and bill contract to a contract that supported prevention. And me and my mates are going, great, we're absolutely set up for this. And the bloody profession voted against it, right? So at that point, I said, well, I'm not giving up prevention.
Yeah.
Maybe I've got to give up the NHS.
Mm.
And so through the 90s, then we started to come out of the NHS substantially,
Okay.
which was, as a socialist like me, brought up in the Welsh Valleys, you know, that was tough.
What does it mean coming out of the NHS for people that are not too aware?
Okay, so I was earning all my money through NHS contract by treating patients on the NHS, and I was trying to get them all healthy, and the contract paid you to fix disease.
Mm.
So if you had a healthy patient, you really didn't have anything to do, great, but you couldn't earn any money off it either. If you'd let them get loads of fill-ins, you'd earn loads of money.
Mm.
So, and I wanted healthy patients, you see. So then I had to say to the patients, I can't carry on doing this work on the NHS. If you've come to me because you want to be healthy, then I can only do it on private contract.
Mm.
And we lost loads of patients because at that time, you know, private dentistry wasn't that common. But I kept a load of patients, and you know, they were real enthusiasts, and they stayed with me, you know, for until I sold the practice, basically. So. And that's one thing I want to get across, you know, because I said to you at the beginning, I didn't want to be a dentist because I didn't regard practice as being anything worthwhile. You know, I wasn't told that it was anything worthwhile. And maybe, I don't know what they say in dental school nowadays, but, you know, you still may get that message, right? And you might get that message from other dentists in practice as well. When I've done Toy Story with groups of foundation dentists, I usually say, you know, how many times have you heard that dentistry is not like it used to be and it's a terrible time to be a dentist and all that sort of stuff? You know, and like half the room put their hands up, and these are in foundation practices. And it really gets me riled, really, really riled. Because people saying that are taking away the hope from those young dentists. And there's no evidence for what they've got to say. There's no reason for what they've got to say.
Yeah.
So I've been working with young dentists since 1987, okay? And I ran my own vocational training scheme for 6 years. And then I did Toy Story, effectively, a program with probably 100 dentists every year for 20 years.
Yes.
And I see a fair number of those dentists again when they come back, you know, in other things I'm doing, or we meet up on a course or something like that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you about a third of those dentists that I've been involved with, and a third of those dentists are thriving. They absolutely love their profession, okay? A third of them say, it's great, and I can do all these other things as well. You know, it's not my be all and end all, but I have a nice life, blah, 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 blah. And a third think it's terrible.
Mm.
It's the worst job in the world, but they're carrying on, and they're usually carrying on because they borrowed so much money to get their house, car, whatever it is. They can't afford to stop, or they don't know to do anything else. So when I look at all these young dentists in front of me, I can say to them, well, a third of you are going to thrive, a third of you are going to say this is pretty good, and a third of you are going to hate it. Yeah. Now, what's the difference? Because you all look the same to me. Do you know what the difference is? It's your attitude.
Okay.
If you apply yourself, dentistry is the most wonderful thing to be involved with, even if you don't like dentistry that much.
Does natural talent have anything to do with this? Does connections have anything to do with this? Is there anything that you're picking out other than this hope and motivation?
I think it's attitude. Because let's say, Arnold, I don't know you, but your talent might be crochet, right?
Yeah.
And you want to become a world champion crocheter, right?
Yeah.
So you can earn enough in 2 days a week, 3 days a week being a dentist, be nice to people, get a bit of, you know, professional profit out of it, if you like, as well as money, and then go off and do something else, right? So, or part of my life has been developing a business, happens to be in dentistry.
Yeah.
But how do you develop teams, you know, and stuff like that? Part of my life has been teaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
Part of my life has been looking into where I am right now, Invisalign, in a big way. You know, that's my clinical, it's not a specialism because that's a legal term, but it's my expertise. Yeah. You can focus on one thing, okay? Yeah. But you don't have to do it all day, every day either, because you've got general practice.
Yeah.
And to me, the best people to do implants, the best people to do ortho, the best people to do restorative is the GDP.
Okay.
Okay, because you're at the center of it all. Now, if there's something that's slightly beyond your skills or beyond the equipment you've got, send them off to an endo specialist or a periodontal specialist for those little bits. But you have that patient. And the one thing, coming back to the point, why is general practice so good? Because you build relationships with patients over years.
Yeah.
And there's no other form of dentistry you can do that in.
Okay.
Right? None. And how good is that in terms of you for your professional life? Because if you care for somebody,
Yes.
they will care back, right? So you get care. You're not just treating this set of teeth that's walking through your. It doesn't happen with everybody, but you get a significant number of patients who really care about you. Secondly, if you want to, we won't get onto research today, but I'm all for practice-based research, and I understand the value and quality of evidence. And you will build up a massive body of clinical evidence because you will see your work year in, year out for years.
Yeah.
And if it goes wrong, you'll be the one to fix it. That is worth something. And no academic can do that.
Yeah.
So the general practitioner, to me, is the top of the tree, not the bottom of the barrel, which is where the attitude that I was given in dental school. So
if sorry to cut you there, but if you were to be deciding who makes it into dental school and you were looking at the qualities needed, would you do it the same way it's done right now, where it's your grades and aptitude tests and then interviews? How would you arrange for dental students to be selected if you had?
Okay, well, the other thing that comes to me there then is that we have a need in dentistry, in our wonderful profession, for all different types of person. Okay. I could not live up a root canal every day of my life. I couldn't do it. But I truly respect colleagues who can.
Yeah.
Now, they may not be as gobby as I am, right? So they may not be the person to stand up in front of a crowd and start spouting.
Yes.
And we need people like me. And we need people who are quite happy, thanks, doing ordinary. I mean, the everyday stuff that most patients need.
Yes.
And looking after the patients, generally caring for them. And we need people who just don't want to be clinical. They want to do research. We need people like that as well. So actually going into dental school, that we need all sorts of people. I wish that they did a sort of basic medical sciences degree first.
Okay.
Because one of the problems I think we do get is if you get halfway through dental school and you think it really doesn't suit me, what do? You have to carry on.
Very good point.
And you end up with this, the license to do a few little things where you could be used in doing other things. And you spend nowadays, a lot of money getting there.
Yeah.
So I think that you have to care about your patients. That ultimately is it. And whether you're a researcher, you have to understand, ultimately there's patient care at the end of this, or you're living up a root canal. Ultimately you have to understand there's patients in there. Dr. Pankey, who set up the Pankey Institutes, said the one thing I truly remember coming back from that first visit was this. Dr. Pankey said, "I never saw a tooth walk into my office." Now just think about that.
Yeah.
If that's not a definition of comprehensive dentistry, I don't know what is.
That's very good.
And when I make mistakes, it's generally because I've forgotten that. I got focused on the tooth or the gum or the bit of plastic or my business process, and I forgot the patient, that human being. But of course, the joy of it is you're dealing with these human beings. Usually they're awake as well, which is not like surgeons, because they usually, put out on whatever. So all of those things. So if you're asking me, the young budding dentist, I think if you're going into it just for have to be honest with yourself. If it's just for status or just for money, there's much easier ways to make lots of money, and there's much easier ways to get status as well, I'm sure. You have to genuinely feel that you have a role to play on behalf of somebody else. That's the professional ethic. But how do you know? I had no idea what dentistry is like when I went into it. We didn't have all the sort of shadowing schemes and things like that. There was a large element of luck, as there has been in much of my life.